a church member, we're going to look at two of the really most important chapters in the book. First, I will be a unifying church member. And it's one thing to be a church member. It's a whole different thing to be a unifying church member. It doesn't take much for a church member that is not about unity, but about themselves to really disrupt things. And especially, guys, in a more normative sized church. That really, it was Charles Spurgeon who said that, on a big steamship, you can run around and you could even play handball or whatever they played back in his day on the deck, and nothing happened. But he said, if you're in a canoe on the Thames and you just shift your weight, the whole thing could tip over. And so in a more normative sized church, even one or two members who are really sowing disunity can just make it almost impossible for the pastor to function. And the adversary knows that. And we have created, really, guys, with our church governance sometimes, not meaning to do this, but we've created a situation where a single member or a single family within a church can create tremendous disunity because they have such a disproportionate influence based on their spiritual maturity, on their giftedness, and on their level of Christian commitment, which is really not what the New Testament teaches. If you'll notice, the New Testament teaches that there are leaders in this church who make decisions, and the leaders are men who have been given, who have exhibited rather extremely high level of quality in their life, including being able to take care of the family, not being quarrelsome, all of that. And then we see that if there are issues in the church, that those leaders take care of that with the people. And if they aren't taken care of, they bring it to the congregation as a whole. I'm talking about church discipline. Now, really, Tom doesn't deal with this in this little book. He's really talking about this from the standpoint of the church member and how that biblically we're called to unity. He presents so many passages about that. He presents about, and this is important, about gossip and negative talk. Because let me tell you something. Most church members don't think gossip and negative talk is disunity. They think it's just church concern. That's what they think. We're just concerned for our church, but it's just one big long line of gossip and negative talk. I'm worried about our preacher because, and then yada, yada, yada. Or I'm worried about the youth leader because, and then there it goes again. And so Tom does a good job of explaining why gossip is not tolerated in the New Testament, because it absolutely destroys unity. And the adversary, Satan, uses it. And let's be honest, we all are enticed by gossip. It's just interesting to me. Here we are in 2020, and, we have so much on Facebook and Twitter. And if you watch television anymore, and most of us probably don't, it's just not worth it. But if you watch television, all of the shows that are the reality shows or that are fallen celebrities around and stuff like that, and all the gossip we're interested in people's lives. I mean, as soon as something happens, it's on Twitter and pictures of people. It's just interesting to me that 2,000 years ago, in an entirely different part of the world and an entirely different culture, without any media whatsoever, right? Any electronic media at all, any print media at all. And yet gossip was a problem in the church. I mean, people are people are people. And the adversary has used that for generations, and it's one of his best tools. And, sometimes some of the most troublesome gossip people can actually be the church leadership and even the pastor. Guys, you have to be really careful not to lean into gossip, not to listen to it, not to feed into it, not to be part of that loop, but to know it when you hear it and to stop it in its tracks and to simply say things. I'm not going to listen to that. Bill and Mary are not here. We're not going to talk about that. If you want me to talk with them about that, let's call them and we'll all talk about that together. But I realize so many times in our church life, gossip is bathed in concern. I'm concerned about, and then we follow up with gossip. I know sometimes we joke about that it's not gossip, it's a prayer concern, but I'm very serious. Having grown up in the culture of a church all of my life, there's all kinds of gossip that goes on. And most of it is couched in terms of I'm just concerned about, but really I'm just talking about them. I'm making myself feel better by explaining their problems and their shortcomings. And so one of the best chapters in this book for church members is this one, because it absolutely talks about the devastating nature of gossip and how the Bible really has absolutely no place for it at all. James talks about it. Paul talks about it in Romans, and how important it is. The basis of really unity in a church is to battle gossip and create an environment where that's not allowed. And we go back, like we talked about months ago when I first started this, and we were talking about some stuff about the importance of covenant membership. Because in covenant membership, we say we covenant together too, and we list those. And one of them is, some of them is just not to gossip or to be a unifying church member. And yesterday at Warnell, when I was preaching, they did the Lord's Supper. They had communion. And they did something that I've seen a lot of new churches, these new young guys that are pastoring do. I never did it when I was a kid. But they don't have the church covenant like we had that was pasted in the front of the hymnal. I mean, that was nobody really nobody voted on that. That was just pasted in the front of the hymnal. And I don't know if you got to be strong, hardcore Southern Baptist to remember those days. But and sometimes they have a big one up on the wall, And it actually, one of the things in the church covenant back in those days, I would not participate in alcohol as a drink or substance or the sale or distribution of it. It was right up there with the virgin birth. And so I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be, but I remember as a kid, that was one that always stood out to me. It was in the hymnal and everything else, but that was just, I don't know where that church covenant came from, Chris, maybe but it had been around for years, but nobody ever really, that's it. Yeah. Nobody ever really adopted it. It was just there. But these newer churches, like Rayner suggests, come up with a church covenant that's much briefer and is much more not so broad. It's more general on, I will support my leaders, I will support my church, I will be present with my giving, I will love my church members and love my community, things like that. Well, yesterday at Warnell, before they took communion, they had printed the church covenant in the bulletin and they read it together. And I have heard churches that have done that prior to taking communion, that we confess our sins, which they did, and had a time of prayer of confession. And then they read that church covenant before they came to the Lord's table and did that together, which really brings me up to the next thing he talks about, which is forgiveness. And so part of, obviously, unity is forgiveness, where we don't hold grudges. We talk a lot about 1 Corinthians 13 when we're talking about marriages, but we need to talk about 1 Corinthians 13. We're talking about church life and church membership, that we don't hold account of grudges. We're not celebrating when other people are hurting and when other wrongs are done, and that our love is unselfish toward one another. And the reality is, guys, that in a world that's becoming more and more fractured and more hateful and more spiteful, we have an opportunity to display for the whole world what it looks like to be a little bit of the kingdom here on earth. And yes, we're going to have differing views on some political things. We're going to have different views on some worship styles and all that. We've talked about that ad nauseum. But for us to come together around the cross and come together around Jesus and come together around one another and show the world that we can be one, and especially multi-generational. We can be one, even though we have all generations, even though we have different preferences and different worldviews. We have one Savior, one Lord, one Father in God, and we are all together, and we will not gossip about each other. We're going to love each other, and if we do something wrong, we're going to forgive each other and be quick to forgive, and that they will know that we are Christians by the way we love each other. Now, look, I know a lot of times we say, boy, I wish I knew what Jesus wanted us to do with his church. I wish, Mark, what should we do? And I've told you before, I don't know exactly, and you don't either right now sometimes, what Jesus' plan is for your church exactly, specifically about certain things. But we do know, without a shadow of a doubt, he wants the church to be unified. He wants the church to be a place where people are accepted and loved, and where gossip is not maintained, and where leadership is followed, and where people forgive one another. And if we would do those things first, listen, this is really important. If we do those things first and we make those a priority, it is through living that way that he can reveal to the church body his will for the church. We just want to jump over all of that and get right to, well, what's the plan? And he's going, well, first the plan is you got to love each other and behave like my children. I'm not going to give you the plan for growth or for life or what your replant plan is until you agree to do what I've already told you to do that you're not doing. You're gossiping. You're not forgiving one another. You're holding grudges. We're not going to go past that. And so I think that's really important. So the second pledge he has in his book is, I will seek to be a source of unity in my church. I know there are no perfect pastors or staff or other church members, but neither am I perfect. I will not be a source of gossip or dissension. And one of the greatest contributions I can make is to do all that I can in my power to help the church keep unity for the sake of the gospel. Now, I just read that to you. I want to do all that I can do. He says, the greatest contribution I can make is to do all that I can do in God's power to keep the church in unity for the sake of the gospel. If you have your book, it's on page 30. I don't know everything that went on with the lawsuit with him and Lifeway. I really don't. But I do know that Thursday and Friday, when he and I were live videoing podcast, he was constantly getting interrupted by phone calls. And if you saw his tweet yesterday, he simply said, Lifeway has 6 demands to end the lawsuit. And he said, I will accept all of them on Monday. And the reason he said he would do it was exactly what he put in his book. He said, so that for the cause of the gospel, so that the world will not see disunity here, but for the cause of the gospel. So, I mean, again, I'm not making I don't know none of us really know all the details. But when he said that, when I saw that tweet and I knew what was in this book, I thought, man, that's really, really putting your money where your mouth is. That's really saying, because, hey, whatever, I don't want to get into it. But it's attorneys that made those 6 demands. And usually, this, when attorneys make demands, they do that for what? They do that for negotiation, right? They make 6. They expect you to come back with 3. We'll figure this out. And he's like, I'm not doing that. We're ending this Monday. And we're ending it for the cause of the gospel. And I thought about this. I thought about, his passion for unity and how that it is so disruptive to the cause of the gospel. So for whatever you think, I couldn't help but think about that when I was getting ready to teach this. And then the third chapter, I love it. It's great. It's my favorite, baby. I'm not them all, but you know this. If you know me, this is perfect. I will not let my church be about my preferences and my desires. Man, wouldn't you love to have a church full of people who, A, value unity more than they value anything else, and will absolutely not put up with any gossip. And if they hear gossip, they're going to just stop it in its tracks. And if they get angry with somebody, they're going to be quick to forgive. How many of you would love to make that your church home? How many of you would love for your children, your grandchildren to grow up in that kind of church so they can say, this is how the world lives, but this is how Christians live? And oftentimes it's just the opposite. Children and grandchildren grow up in homes and they go, this is how the world lives, and it ain't no different in our church. They backbite, they talk bad about each other, they don't forgive each other. So number one, that. But number two, how would you love to pastor a church where people said, it's not about what I want, it's about what Jesus wants. It's not about what I want. It's about what will glorify God. It's not about what I want. It's about how will this church be able to make an impact on the community, to create a culture so that people desire what Jesus desires, not what they desire. And so many times, again, he talks about the servant motif. And guys, one of the ways you can communicate this, one of the ways you can communicate this to your people over a long period of time, not like one Sunday, not like one meeting. You're not going to change. I mean, the Holy Spirit can change anybody, obviously, in one time. But as a pastor, as a shepherd, you're not going to turn the whole flock on a dime with one meeting or one sermon or one conference or one book. But if you use that servant motif, if you just pepper your conversation, if you pepper your sermons, if you season your sermons, if you season your conversation, and this is really important, if you model it in your life, that servant motif, that I am here to be a servant, I am not here to be served. He says that the word servant appears 57 times in the New Testament. Sometimes it refers to a person that has an official role in the household, but many times it refers to Christians. And to serve someone occurs 58 times. I mean, Jesus said we must at least be servants all the time. That doesn't sound like most church members we know. Most church members we know demand things. They have preferences. My needs need to be met. And again, it goes back to John F. Kennedy. I mean, you could say that so perfectly about a church. It's not what can the church do for me, but what can I do for my church? We never find joy in church membership when we constantly seek things our way. I mean, find ways to get that thought into your sermons, into your prayer, your pastoral prayer, into your conversations, into your committee meetings. Help people understand that listen, you're not about taking away their joy. You're not about trying to deny them something by not giving them their preferences. You're actually trying to give them joy by not having them focus on their preferences. Does that make sense? Because if they focus on their preferences, they're never going to have joy. They're always going to be worried that they're not going to get enough, or their preferences are going to be taken away, or whatever you gave them this week, you're going to take away next week. And so it's really important to help them understand, because I want you to have ultimate joy in your life, we cannot focus on our preferences, because that is a cul-de-sac that leads nowhere. That's what the world offers. That's why every 18 months or 12 months, you've got to get a new iPhone. That's why you've got to get a new truck with a new kind of tailgate. That's why what you have today is just not going to be good enough tomorrow. I mean, preferences are what drives us to say it's got to be something better out there than what I have right here. I'm not satisfied with what I have. And it's just the opposite with the gospel. I mean, we're satisfied in Jesus. He is all that we need to be happy. And our preference is whatever he asks us to do. That's where we will find our source of joy. So listen, I know sometimes as a pastor, we think we need to appease people, not please, but appease them and lean toward their preferences. And that's just not true. We need to meet their spiritual and emotional needs. Absolutely. We need to shepherd them and care for them. Absolutely. But you cannot lean into their preferences. I think I've told you many times in the weeks we've been together, the moment you begin to make decisions based on keeping the people you have rather than reaching the people that are not there, that's the moment you're pivoting toward death. That's the moment you're leaving revitalization. Because once you start down that path, you have given up leadership to people who by their own complaining and whining and wanting will be able to manipulate you. And I've had this conversation the last couple of weeks with some guys and say, how far do I pursue people to get them to come back to church? How far do I pursue people now that COVID's come? You know, we talk about this a lot. Now that COVID is here, you know, there are some people who aren't coming back. Tom and I did a podcast on that the other day that we'll put out later in the month. But basically, his research shows that 25% of people are probably not going to come back. But that's another story for another day. But when people aren't coming back, or when they do come back and we start to rebuild things and they want particular things, and if you don't have it, they may not stay. We may go somewhere else. You know, I had a young pastor last week who said I may have told you this already, but he was really broken because one of his best families with children said, we're leaving because we need to find a church that has Awanas. Well, he was like, you could go to Awanas on Wednesday night somewhere else. That's okay, and still be in our church. Yes, but we want our kids to be kind of where the other kids in Awanas there on Sunday mornings, and we want to be fully engaged in that. And it was, the implication was, you know, if we had Awanas, we might stay here, or even if we thought we might have Awanas in the future, we might stay here. And Matt said to me, you know, how much do I pursue them? And I said, my experience has been anybody I pursued to bring back left later on anyway, for the most part, and they weren't happy once they came back. And I'm not suggesting you just you know, blow them off, but I am suggesting there is a time to shake the dust off your feet and find some people who don't know Jesus, and rather than spend an inordinate amount of energy and emotional bandwidth and time chasing down church members who aren't unifying, who are looking for something better, how about finding some people who don't know Jesus yet and lead them to Christ and disciple them? I mean, that's really what you need to do. And so, again, I think, obviously, we don't want to lose people. Nobody wants to lose people. Part of that's our pride. Part of it is financial, a lot of other reasons. But at the same time, we really have to understand that we cannot give into preferences of other people. And anyway, so he does list on pages 36 and 37, 38, basically from Autopsy of a Deceased Church. If you read this book, you saw it. This was the genesis of the book we went through. That the survey he took, he said his research team at Lifeway took a survey of inwardly focused churches, and here was their biggest problems. They were constantly arguing over the kind of music they were going to have and the type of worship they were going to have. I don't want to keep giving, just examples of Warnell because I haven't been there for 5 years. But when I went yesterday, I mean, the music was just generic. I mean, it was just some hymns. There was nothing flashy. There was there was a guy that played guitar, a lady that played keyboard, and I think there was a guy on djembe and 2 female vocalists, but they were just hymns and some songs that everybody would know. And the emphasis, how can I put this? The emphasis was not on the musicians. It was just on the words we were singing and the songs we were singing. There wasn't anything about the worship yesterday that highlighted the great praise band or the great singers. It was all about we're singing corporately together. In fact, the leadership on the platform of the worship team was subdued. I know worship leaders mean well when they do this, but how many times, or you as a pastor, mean well when you do this? But how many times do we go out on Sunday morning and we say, how y'all feeling today? Y'all feeling good today? Everybody smile. Let me see you smile. All right. What you're doing is you're saying, hey, respond to me. Respond to me. No, I'm not there to respond to the pastor. I'm not there to respond to I'm not at a concert, all right? I'm not at a stand-up comedian event. I'm there to respond to one person alone, and that's God. So I'm called not to respond to a worship leader. I'm called to respond to God. And so yesterday I noticed at Warnell, there was an actual call to worship. And we're gathered here now to make much of him. And so we're going to focus on him. We're not going to focus on the worship team. We're not, and nothing wrong with, in essence, there's nothing wrong with that. But as I think about it, when we talk about worship wars, it's because we give in to people's preferences. I don't know, yesterday with 200 people there, many of them young people, but there were some older people there. The words of the hymns were great, but it was about the most generic sort of nondescript music. But the words were great. I just thinking, why can't we do more of that? Why does everything have to be some kind of over the top, our worship team burned it up like yesterday. We got the great, why can't we just sing to God? I don't know. It's neither here nor there. But I think we give into worship wars because we become so stylized in one way or another is what I'm trying to say. And when we become that stylized, it really leans into preferences. And I was just impressed yesterday with the fact that you could say, well, that was a style. Well, it was just singing songs. It was just, I don't know, whatever. I think about that a lot. I think about the fact that, for like 2,000 years of the church's history, we just came together and sang a song. And the last 50 years, the tempo of the song, the arrangement of the song become a huge deal. What kind of music do we like? Where did that come from? Anyway, whatever. He talks about prolonged meetings. We've talked about that. He talks about the focus on the facility, program-driven, inwardly focused budget, inordinate demands of pastoral care, an attitude of entitlement, a greater concern about change than concern about the gospel, anger and hostility. Members are angry and express that toward each other, and then evangelistic apathy. In almost every one of those behaviors, church members were looking out for their own needs and their own preferences. So he went down those 10 things that he saw that they surveyed in dying churches. Worship wars, prolonged meetings, that some people love to just control a meeting. a focus on facilities. Some people love their pew. They love by the way, yesterday, we're getting rid of our pews at Linwood, and we put them on Facebook Marketplace. And basically, any church that wants them can have them. So I got a church from Central Kansas coming out tomorrow to pick them up and take them. But I had one lady from Kansas City text me, and she's coming out today to pick out the pew that her grandmother sat in for all of those years. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I guess she says she knows which one it was. So I thought about switching them around, but I wouldn't do that. Whatever. So anyway, so she's going to pick out. But I mean, apparently it's okay to sit in the same pew, but basically facility focused to really, oh, that's the pew my grandmother sat in. It's like, well, whatever. Program driven. We talked about that, inwardly focused. All those things, really, all of those have to do with what I want. And so in every one of those destructive behaviors that lead toward church decline, members were looking out for their own needs and their own preferences. I want the music my way. I want the building my way. I'm upset because the pastor doesn't spend enough time and visit me or spend enough time in the office. I don't want these changes to take place in my church. You get the picture. It's all about I, me, and myself. Church membership from a biblical perspective, however, is about servanthood, and it's about giving up our preferences for others. And the best passage on that is Philippians chapter 2, 5 through 11, where Paul said, make your own attitude that of Christ Jesus. He did not consider equality with God as something to be used for his own advantage. He emptied himself by assuming the form of a slave. He humbled himself. He became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. I mean, again, guys, the way you can lead a church to this is not to just deal with it when it becomes a problem, but to, again, just season your conversations, season your sermons, constantly be re-emphasizing that we do this not because we are trying to discipline you or hold you back or remove your joy, but because we absolutely want you to find joy. That this is the only way to have joy in life. It's the only way to have joy in the church. It's the way to glorify Christ. And it's the true way he wants his church to behave. So the third pledge, he says, I will not let my church be about my preferences or my desires. That is self-serving. I am a member in this church to serve others and to serve Christ. My Savior went to a cross for me. I can deal with inconvenience and matters that aren't my preference or my style. So again, at the end of each of these chapters, he has these he has these pledges that members sign. And I have gone through this book in a very resistant to change church at First Baptist Church Baser. Actually, I found an elderly lady. I shouldn't say elderly. She wouldn't like that. A middle-aged, maybe going up to elderly lady who taught it, who had been a member there for years. First, I gave it to her, and I said, I want you to read it, and I want you and I to talk about it. And she began to read it. She and I began to talk about it, and she began to own it, and she thought it was a great book. So here I had an older member, lady in her late 60s, who'd been a member of that church for a long time and had a lot of respect. She's the one that began to teach this to the senior adults first and foremost, and they began to see it. And it did make a very big change in them. And now they use it for every new member who comes in, and they use this pledge for every new member who comes in. Guys, I don't want you to overlook it. It is an amazing resource. And we all want church members who reflect this. And so I don't want you to miss it. We'll finish it up next week. There are 3 more chapters, and we'll run through them next week. But it is a great summary of all the stuff he's written, and it's put in the way that lay people can understand it, that lay people can embrace it. And then I love the fact that at the end of each thing, there's things you can do, and there's a pledge you can sign, and there's actions you can take, and you can continue to remind people of this. And even say in your sermons and your conversations, remember in the book we read about I'm a church member, it talks about servanthood. It talks about our preferences. And we're not going to all agree on this, but we all remember we're all in unity for Christ on this. And it gives you a baseline from which to work. And it's something that we should have had decades ago. And we need it desperately today, probably more than ever. When you think about what's going on in the church today, you think about COVID, you think about the disruptions that we've had that we're going to continue to have. You think about the political agenda that's going on, all the social issues and social unrest. Man, we really need to know what it means to be a church member. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, not so much. I mean, we were all in Christendom. Most of the people we were reaching all lived in the same neighborhood, thought about the same way, lived about the same kind of life. But man, we are so diverse today and getting more diverse all the time that this is critically important and we cannot overlook it. All right. Got some time for questions if you'd like to